Ms. Sohn, I have had continuing concerns about you from your previous two hearings, and my concerns are only increased during this hearing. This is a hugely important position. It relates to free speech in America, it relates to liberty, it relates to elections. It encompasses so much. And I think you have demonstrated here and through your actions that you are a far-left partisan whose public record demonstrates a profound lack of judgment, lack of candor, professionalism, and very importantly, temperament needed to be an FCC chairman or an FCC commissioner. And by the way, there are all these talks about smears, character assassinations, vitriol. The chairman mentioned that. I'm simply going to ask you about your statements. And if there's any vitriol in this hearing, it's coming from your words, not our words. So let me begin by an issue that's directly in your wheelhouse if you were confirmed. You said, quote, "For all my concerns about Facebook, I believe that Fox News has had the most negative impact on our democracy. It is state-sponsored propaganda." Now, millions of people watch Fox News. I happen to be one of them. Before Fox News came on the air, there was very little conservative voices. So do you still believe Fox News is state-sponsored propaganda? And if they came before you as a commissioner, you certainly would recuse yourself, wouldn't you? I mean, this is not just a minor statement. You are calling them the most negative impact on our democracy and state-sponsored propaganda. Is MSNBC state-sponsored propaganda?
So Fox News, actually, the FCC doesn't have jurisdiction over Fox News. And just as an...
If the FCC or any of its entities came before, if Fox News or any related entity came before the FCC, would you recuse yourself?
No. In fact,
Why?
I help Fox Broadcasting.
Answer
I help Fox Network actually get on the air.
Do you know, when you call something state-sponsored propaganda, isn't that a little bit of a bias? The answer is yes.
Conversation,
Come on, be direct with this committee.
Senator, if I may. I was talking about, I was in the context of a Section 230 hearing where folks were talking about disinformation on platforms. And the point that I was making in that tweet was that the government, if the government's going to look at platforms, they also need to look at Fox News.
I think, look, I have a lot of questions for you, and I'm going to try to be respectful, but I also, if I think you're filibustering, I'm going to cut you off. I think when you call an entity one of the most negative, having one of the most negative impacts on our democracy and state-sponsored propaganda, and you have control over speech, that's a giant problem. And it certainly shows a lack of judgment and a bias. So, by the way, a bias on conservative views. Let me go to another issue that's very troubling to me, and it's your open disdain for Republicans, okay? Now, you've said, quote, "Republicans know that the only way they can win an election is to suppress the vote." Wow, that's not my view. That's not the view of Republicans here. The only way Republicans can win is to suppress the vote. You also said, maybe, quote, "maybe next elections, Republicans will stop beating up on gays and women." I mean, do you understand how just ridiculously infuriating statements like this are? You are ripping half of the country. Do you realize that?
So let me address the one about...
Now, just answer my question. Do you apologize for these statements? By the way, and when people say, this has nothing to do with the FCC, baloney. This is about free elections. You are saying you think Republicans want to suppress the vote. Do you understand how offensive these kind of statements are? And by the way, how untrue they are. These aren't retweets. These are your statements. You want to talk about vitriol for America? This is pouring gas on American partisanship.
Senator, let her answer the question.
Senator,
I want to get to two more people.
Yeah, I've admitted that some of my tweets were sharp and more partisan than I would even prefer. However, that tweet in particular was in reaction to what happened in Harris County, Texas, where the Republican leadership shut down drive-through voting. And that, again, has nothing to do, that was my
Madam Chair,
opinion.
I have another question.
So you have to have the context.
Actually, you do, but you don't, right? I mean, you're making a statement, Republicans know the only way they can win an election is to suppress the vote. It's offensive. And it is, and it goes to your character, goes to your judgment. Let me just mention one other, and then I'm going to come back in round two. You keep saying that you're, quote, baffled by opposition by police forces, baffled. And I know we've talked about it, the National Association of Police Organizations, they're very against you. And it's not because of the security of information, it's retweeting things like armed goons and riot gear, defunding the police. They're saying it's profoundly concerning to us that a nominee for the commissioner of the FCC has harbored such an openly and hostile and defamatory views of the police. I was just out with the Anchorage PD doing a ride-along recently. Why on earth would you be baffled by their opposition when you are making statements or supporting statements that are so derogatory? It's obvious why. Because you're coming at them so hard. Why would you be baffled?
I'm baffled because there's 11, out of 18,000 tweets of mine, there's 11 tweets. Most of them were, police brutality is bad. Police shouldn't have tanks and be in armored vehicles.
Armed goons?
What's that?
Armed goons?
Okay, well, again,
You're baffled that they're opposing you after you call them armed
that's
goons?
one tweet out of 18,000.
It's one tweet enough to make you disqualified, in my view. And the law enforcement in America right now is undergoing profound challenges. And it is also remarkable, you mentioned it, that the FCC doesn't have a lot of authority over law enforcement, but that law enforcement is coming out so strongly against you. And it's because you're driving a narrative that is so harmful to them. And by the way, it's untrue. They're not armed goons, they're heroes. And you ought to apologize for all of these. Madam Chair and Ms. Son, I think you're getting a sense of frustration here. And you keep talking about context. Let me give you some context. You know, you're one of a long line of Biden administration nominees who have made tweets and statements about Republicans being white supremacists, Republicans want to suppress the vote, Republicans, quote, beating up women and gays, that's your quote, racists. And you know what, it's just tiring. It's really tiring. It was almost at one point, it seemed like if you made one of these statements in a tweet, the Biden administration put you at the top of the list to nominate you, right? So you're part of that cohort, and it's frustrating. Do you understand why people get frustrated? Do you understand why millions of Americans look at this and go, really problematic? She does not have the temperament making these statements. Do you understand that?
I understand that people are frustrated, and I don't like the partisanship either. Okay, you know, things have gotten sharper since 2016.
But you keep saying sharper, but you're going to have enormous power if you're an FCC commissioner. Let me just make two final points. One is just a correction for the record. You probably don't know it, but in terms of OAN, the president of OAN just tweeted out, your lack of support for diverse voices makes her unqualified to be an FCC commissioner. That's Charles Herring. Maybe he's watching the hearing and has changed his view. And similarly, the CEO of OAN just said, One American News, the CEO and owner just tweeted that OAN does not, and will never support Ms. Son for commissioner. So just correcting the record, because I think earlier you said OAN supports you. I think definitively they don't. Let me ask a final question, which is a really important one, and it relates to the policies that you would be really overseeing. And it relates to rural broadband connectivity for rural communities. You know, we just had an infrastructure bill that focused on this. A lot of people talk about it, and you have, you know, it's important for urban areas to go from 4G to 5G. You know, I always raise my hand and say, hey, what about no G? What about no G? My state, is not connected at all. And so the infrastructure bill prioritized rural communities, and yet you have, again, come out with, I believe, an elitist, urban, rural view on broadband connectivity. And I'm not going to quote from you. I'm going to quote from a op-ed from Senator Heidi Heitkamp, who last year wrote an op-ed entitled, "Gigi Son is wrong for the FCC in rural America." I'd like to submit that for the record, Madam Chair.
Without objection.
So in it, Senator Heitkamp, Democrat Senator Heitkamp, said that in your testimony before the House Energy and Commerce Committee, you said, quote, "Policymakers have focused disproportionately on broadband development in rural areas of the United States," unquote. Then, this is Senator Heitkamp talking here, Son also criticized the FCC broadband policies and claimed they made it, quote, "really easy for rural broadband companies," this is now she's quoting you, "to basically suck at the government's teat to the tune of tens of billions of dollars," unquote. It's pretty vitriolic in my view. And then here's how Senator Heitkamp summarizes her op-ed against your confirmation. Quote, "Given the significant progress that's been made in closing the rural digital divide in recent years and all the important work that remains to fully close the gap, this deeply cynical view of rural broadband by Gigi Son does not inspire confidence." I couldn't agree more. This is a gigantic issue for me and my constituents and for Democrats and Republicans. So do you still think senators like me, quote, "focus disproportionately on broadband development in rural areas"? I guarantee you, my constituents who have no G would fundamentally disagree with you.
Yes, Senator, just because I said they disproportionately focus doesn't mean that I don't support all efforts. And like I said, I was one of the biggest supporters of the BEAD program in the infrastructure bill. That doesn't mean I don't support rural broadband, but there has been, and particularly at the time, not so much now, okay? It's interesting.
I'm quoting you from 2020.
Right,
not that
correct.
long
I was
ago.
testifying at a hearing about closing the digital divide and digital equity. And I wanted to make the point that nobody really was talking about the digital divide in cities at the time, and that everybody was only talking about rural. Now we're talking about urban and rural, and I think that's really good.
But you make the statement makes it sound like
Because it's taken out of context.
You're critical of legislators who are trying to close the rural divide. It makes me nervous about what you will do if you become the commissioner with now not only an anti-conservative view, an anti-Republican view, you have an anti-rural America view, and it's not just me saying it. Heidi Heitkamp said it.
Senator, if you would meet with me, and I think we are going to meet, so I'm really happy about that, you will see that I know more about how to fix the digital divide in Alaska than most people, okay? And I'd really love to talk to you about the substance, because I've got all kinds of ideas. I share some of your concerns about the rural health care program, about other programs. I care, and I have a lot of support in your state. Hopefully you've heard from some of them. So I do care deeply, particularly about your state and making sure everybody has broadband, because I know it's the least connected state.
It is.
So I hope we do have an opportunity to actually talk about what's real in your state, because I think I would be a fantastic commissioner for the state of Alaska.
I'm even willing to join that meeting, just as I've joined other Alaska infrastructure meetings.
I want to compliment the chair on these kind of issues.
No, it really is important. I mean, Alaska does have a very, very unique challenge, and all the things that you think you're going to do for all the rest of the states is not going to work in Alaska, so it needs its own plan. So I appreciate that, and I will happily attend that meeting.